WrestleMania 7 was originally set to take place in front of 100,000 fans at the Los Angeles Coliseum in Los Angeles, California. Instead, the event was moved to the LA Sports Arena that held around 15,000 fans, making it a significant downgrade from the SkyDome, which played host to WrestleMania 6 the year prior in Toronto. WrestleMania 7 was headlined by an extremely controversial storyline at the time when former American hero and longtime babyface Sergeant Slaughter turned heel by aligning himself with General Adnan, becoming an Iraqi sympathizer in the process. The execution of this WrestleMania contributed to the downturn of the WWF's business following the boom of Hulkamania throughout the 80s, and may have been a catalyst in the downturn of the company. Today I uncover arguably the most controversial storyline the WWF has ever produced. WrestleMania 6 delivered a passing of the torch moment in an iconic match that pitted Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior against one another, babyface versus babyface. Warrior pinned Hogan clean in the middle of the ring to capture the WWF title in front of 67,678 screaming fans. That night, the WWF would announce that they were running WrestleMania 7 from the LA Coliseum in an attempt to break the attendance record set at WrestleMania 3. The craze for Los Angeles to host WrestleMania began after WrestleMania 5, when the manager of the Coliseum, Joe Furren, put his name in the hat to host WrestleMania 6. Eventually, LA lost out to Toronto for WrestleMania 6, but they were given the rights to host WrestleMania 7. Furren was so eager to host a WrestleMania at the Coliseum that he produced an epic bid video to convince Vince McMahon to host the event there. The video included clips of local fans vouching for the show to take place in LA, clips of the World Series, Super Bowls, and the Olympics that took place at the Coliseum, and along with a shot of a ring in the middle of the field. I watched the bid video and it was very convincing, so I could see why McMahon would want his circus to take over Los Angeles. The bid worked, and tickets for WrestleMania 7 went on sale the very next day after WrestleMania 6. Now, one would think that the natural match chosen to headline WrestleMania 7 would have been a rematch between Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior. Warrior, who was champion for most of 1990 while Hogan was gone for part of the year to film Suburban Commando, which was actually one of the Hulkster's better films. During Hogan's absence, Warrior did a solid job as the lead guy of the WWF. Pay-per-view numbers were up in general, except for SummerSlam, I want to say. Ratings were solid, and merch sales were near Hogan levels. For some strange reason, the story that Warrior was not a draw during his reign has been told for several years. Warrior was not at Hogan's exact level of ratings and merchandise, of course, but he was right near that level, which was good enough to keep things more than afloat. There was no real reason given as to why Warrior was not chosen to main event WrestleMania 7. We have heard for years that Jim Hellwig was not the easiest guy to get along with backstage. Could that have been the reason? Maybe it was because he was not the best in-ring worker. Allegedly, Rick Rude hated working with him during his title reign. There are numerous factors that contributed to the downfall of the Warrior. Now that is a video for another day. Hulk Hogan would have certainly got his win back over Warrior after putting him over at WrestleMania 6, so there was little doubt in my mind that Hogan talked his way out of doing the match. The WWF is presented with this layup of a match between its two biggest stars to present its best foot forward in front of 100,000 people in what would have been the most epic of clashes in the history of our great sport. Now, what did Vincent Kennedy McMahon do with this said layup? Well, he grabbed the ball and took a step-back three from the logo and airballed. Originally, Vince McMahon and presumably Bruce Pritchard came up with a fantastic idea to have Tugboat, yes, that's right, Uncle Fred as Cody Rhodes calls him, turn heel and align himself with General Adnan under the moniker Sheik Tugboat. This idea, which Pritchard spoke about in his podcast, would have bared witness to freaking Tugboat main event a WrestleMania in front of 100,000 people for the WWF Championship. The WWF really thought that putting his best foot forward meant Tugboat, not, I don't know, Randy Savage, the aforementioned Ultimate Warrior, or maybe even Roddy Piper? I don't know, maybe I'm crazy. Now this is when things start to get funky. Once upon a time, Sergeant Slaughter was a big star in the WWF in the early days after Vince purchased the company from his father. Slaughter was even considered to be the face of the company prior to Hogan's signing. Eventually, Slaughter and McMahon would get into a dispute over Slaughter's involvement with the G.I. Joe action figures and the animated series, which led to his departure from the company. After that sweet, sweet G.I. Joe money dried up, Slaughter came calling to congratulate Vince McMahon on a hell of a show at WrestleMania 6. On August 2nd, 1990, Iraq invaded Kuwait to take over their oil field and forcibly make them one of their provinces. Somebody at the WWF office took note of this and thought it would be a good idea to align G.I. Joe himself, pal, Sergeant Slaughter, with General Adnan. Sergeant Slaughter, whose gimmick was that of a former U.S. Marine that fought in the Vietnam War and had not been on WWF TV for over 5 years until his return in the fall of 1990. Somehow, the creative geniuses that be thought it would be a great idea to have this guy, this American hero, align himself with Iraq and become an Iraqi sympathizer. Now, General Adnan legitimately attended high school with then Iraq President Saddam Hussein. That is just one of those facts that makes stories like this even wilder to me. Vignettes aired featuring Slaughter declared that he made his choices because the American people became soft and he admired the brutality of Iraq. I genuinely cannot believe that WWE turned a real-life war into a storyline. Now, to play devil's advocate for a moment, the invasion of Kuwait was what the entire world was talking about for several months. So I guess I could kind of see why they would want to do something like this. But the general public just did not want to see a character side with a country America was about to be at war with. It's kind of unsettling. People go to watch wrestling to escape. This resulted in Slaughter's family receiving death threats. It was so bad that Slaughter had to relocate his family to another city to keep them safe, and McMahon even had to hire personal security for them. The WWF was experimenting with volatile levels of heat at this juncture, and for no reason, because the ticket sales for the event eventually flopped. Sergeant Slaughter, who was off wrestling in the AWA and voicing an animated G.I. Joe for the past years, waltzed back into the WWF as a dastardly heel and was given the WWF title 4 months later at the Royal Rumble in 1991. Ironically, George Bush announced that the U.S. would go to war with Iraq just 2 days after the Royal Rumble. Slaughter had no business being in the title picture at all. He is one of the weaker champions in the company's history. Part of me doesn't really blame Warrior for being so frustrated with McMahon at the time. The guy just beat Hogan and was moving as much merch as him, and then he is just fed to a voice actor? Back to the event flopping. After the Royal Rumble, ticket sales for the upcoming WrestleMania began to make headlines, as they had sold roughly 15,000 of the 100,000 tickets for sale. Vince had no choice but to move the event to the smaller LA Sports Arena, not just due to the poor ticket sales. The 1991 Super Bowl was in doubt of even taking place after national security levels were raised from the impending war. The 1991 Super Bowl was in doubt of even taking place after national security levels were raised from the impending war. Super Bowl 25 was held in Tampa, Florida, and cost millions of dollars to provide the security that was required during the national crisis. McMahon could simply not justify taking a loss on ticket sales and fronting a bill necessary to protect 100,000 people, so he cut bait and held the event in a standard basketball or hockey arena. The show ended up being one of the better WrestleManias of the first 10, largely due to Ultimate Warrior vs. Randy Savage and the moment of Savage and Elizabeth reuniting. The mighty Hulkster marched down the aisle decked out in red, white, and blue, holding an American flag, and dropped the leg on the evil Sergeant Slaughter to get the 1, 2, 3, brother. Just how did this show derail the WWF's momentum? Well, for one, wrestling is looked at through an entirely different lens than any form of entertainment. Sports have legitimate outcomes, so they are looked at as more credible, while movies are looked at as not real and simply fiction. Wrestling is both scripted and real as it airs on live TV and features people acting in real time. Wrestling almost never is able to get away with blurring the lines. Now, there is a difference in between blurring the lines and going too far. The WWE using a real-life war, which was also the most talked about subject in America, to draw ratings, is probably done in poor taste and is probably too far. Though I see where they are coming from. In a perfect world, an Iraqi sympathizer getting his ass beat by the American hero Hulk Hogan would draw a bigger house than an Ultimate Warrior vs. Hogan rematch. At the end of the day, people did not want to see politics and war mixed with their entertainment. The WWF derailed their momentum in a major way. People were turned off in droves from watching the product. WrestleMania 7 did 400,000 buys, down 160,000 from the year prior, and 267,000 from WrestleMania 5 2 years prior to that. That mark is where WrestleMania would plateau at for the next several years until WrestleMania 13 hit a new low of 237,000 buys in 1997. I strongly believe that if the WWE had decided to run a Warrior vs. Hogan rematch, that they would have packed out the Coliseum and could have kept their momentum going by having Hulkamania continue to run wild. Ultimately, most will attribute the WWE's decline in business in the early to mid-90s to the steroids trial and the departure of big stars. But in my humble opinion, the WrestleMania 7 build-up and poor use of a real-life war is a major contributing factor to the decline. It is as big of a contribution in comparison to the other two situations in my opinion. There was one great thing about this show, which I touched on briefly earlier: Macho Man Randy Savage versus Ultimate Warrior. Randy Savage was tasked with the inevitable task of producing a 20-minute long match with Jim Hellwig, and boy did Randy deliver. This match is no question, hands down, Ultimate Warrior's best in-ring match of his entire career. The match was in the middle of a 14-match card and was the high point of the show for me. Fans, well, the ones that were there even through the heinous promotional tactics, were still very much in love with Hulk Hogan. At the end of the night, the 15,000 people at the LA Sports Arena all went home happy after their hero, Terry Bollea, conquered the evil G.I. Joe, brother. The pop was very loud and deafening, so maybe this show wasn't so bad after all. That's for you to decide. This has been another edition of Wrestling Uncovered. What are your memories of WrestleMania 7? If you lived through it, like I didn't live through it, I'm so young. If you lived through it, tell me about it. What was it like? Were people actually disgusted by this? Are my estimations right? Could this promotion, could this feud between Hulk Hogan and Sergeant Slaughter actually have contributed to the downfall of the WWF in the 90s? You let me know. I'll talk to you guys on the next one. Thank you all so much again for checking out my channel. Have a good one.